All right, Maria, we're going to take
Right.
our deep dive. As you know, we are talking, let's talk about mental health. That's the series that we're in now. And you have alluded to anxiety and depression
Mhm.
as subsequent from after a car accident. And so I don't know if that's the time that you're going to share about, but tell us a time that you struggled.
Right. So that was back in 2006. And I had gone through a series of, you know, I had a great Christian counselor at the time and really had thought at the end of our sessions that I was good. And I did end up being able to function uh, fine for about a 17-year period, believe it or not. So 17 years, we'll fast forward, and now we're in 2020, 2020, the infamous year. So what happened is we actually began caregiving for my mother-in-law. She had dementia, and it was a great time for us to be able to honor her during a
Mhm.
really difficult time in her life. So we had her for just 3 months, but each of my husband's siblings were taking her for that period of time. And I recall several times she was a very sweet lady, but as you know, with dementia, things can kind of go off the rails.
Mm,
And she would tend to do things that were unsafe. She would try to come
mm.
downstairs without any help. She'd
Oh
try to
gosh.
walk on downstairs without her walker. And on one particular occasion, she told us that she was going to walk back to Ohio. So we live in Georgia, and
Oh gosh.
you
Okay,
can
that's
see
all.
where
Yeah.
that's going. So she actually walked
Yes.
out the door, and we've got a flight of stairs that goes down to a sidewalk. And
Oh,
my husband had to run after her and literally pick her up and bring her back in the house.
oh.
And that did not go well. So she proceeded to start arguing with him, and he had to raise his voice.
Mm.
And for some reason, that just really bothered me. And I got to the place where it just shut me down. And I said, I just need to go upstairs. And I didn't understand why. I didn't know what was going
Hmm.
on really at that point.
Okay.
So in January, we took my mother-in-law to my husband's sister, dropped her off, and I thought, oh, this bit of angst and kind of depressed feeling is going to go away. And we drove away, and it really didn't leave. So a
Wow.
few days later, I thought, maybe I just need to get back into all the activities that I was a part of prior to her coming to stay with us. And that included Bible study that I was leading online. I was part of a
Mhm.
women's prayer team that I had started, and just getting back into church activities and things like that.
Right.
So I was actually teaching through a book called Comparison Girl by Shannon Popkin. And it was really interesting because the further I got in that study, the more I realized, you know what? I'm doing exactly what the author is telling me not to do.
Really.
So, yeah. So, and that was kind of in my skewed thinking because I was already going into anxiety.
Was that,
So,
as you look back, was that kind of the beginning? Like it's almost like smoldering, sort of
yes.
everything is, things are kind of lining up perfectly for this?
Yes, yes. So I did something that I've never done before. I just walked away from the study. I had a couple more weeks left to teach, and was actually having the author come on and doing a Q&A with us.
Wow.
So, and I never contacted her, never, it was bad. And I had my husband reach out to all the ladies who were part of that study and just say, Maria's not feeling well. She's not going to be able to continue. So that started a 2.5 year journey through anxiety and depression. That was the first lie that I believed was I'm not worthy to teach this study.
Oh,
I,
yes.
I just can't do this. So that was one of many lies. And over the course of 2.5 years, I ended up attempting suicide twice
Oh my
and ended
goodness.
up in psychosis.
Oh,
So,
oh
yeah, it
gosh.
was a very, very difficult, dark time, not only for myself, but obviously for my husband, who was my caregiver,
Mm,
and for family and friends.
mm,
So that's my dark time. Um,
right. Okay. For some reason, I thought uh, th was 2006 when the car accidents happened. So
correct. Yeah.
that
So
happened.
that happened. I fully recovered after 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then, um, so then you went into I'm fine mode for a huge chunk of time, and then the
yes,
mother-in-law that cut. So things were sort of sitting there, kind of
correct. And
getting
the
ready.
piece that I didn't understand that I
Yeah.
had mentioned to you earlier, when my husband and mother-in-law were arguing, and I shut down and didn't understand why. Eventually, after the Lord healed me, he gave my husband just insight and wisdom to know that it was from childhood trauma. So
Oh.
I grew up with an alcoholic dad, and
Oh.
his words and actions really created conflict. And, not at the time, I was maybe 11, 10 or 11, and it was just something that I could not handle. So I would shut down, suppress emotions, and
Well, and
try
who
to,
could, right?
right,
Come on. I mean,
exactly,
gosh. And you
exactly.
cope the best way you know how, and oftentimes
Yes,
it's not well, and it's not necessarily healthy, but you're in survival mode.
exactly.
Mm,
So it was interesting for me to be able to recognize, wow, that's where I got my response to
mhm,
conflict. It was baked in back there as a
mm.
kid. So anytime I would come into conflict, I would shut down or try to avoid the subject. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So it's been a journey, even after being healed and set free from anxiety and depression,
Mhm.
to really work through that conflict and my response to conflict. And
Oh, man.
it's been fabulous being able to use what we've learned to help other people, and to realize that, you know, I'm obviously not the only one who is dealing with something from the past that needs to
Right.
be brought to light
Right.
and exposed and dealt with.
Right. And
So,
don't you find it interesting that unpacking all of this obviously takes time and is in of itself this unbelievable journey or process of, looking at not even necessarily one thing at a time, but just it just keeps. I can't even come up with a good analogy or a metaphor for it. It just, yeah, I'm very struck by your timeline and everything that unfolded, and then the healing, the becoming aware, because it's hard to make change until you're aware, and to be aware you have to, sometimes you do have to go back and figure out, oh my gosh, that came all the way from that.
exactly, exactly. And it was very, the healing process was something that was very unmistakably the hand of the Lord.
Okay.
So what happened is my husband, one evening, in fact, it was August 11th of 2023, and he had asked me why I wasn't wearing an an anniversary ring that he had bought me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just made excuses. And finally, that evening, I shared with him, in psychosis, all of these irrational thoughts and accusations. It had gotten to the place, Rechelle, where I thought that he was trying to kill me.
Oh my gosh.
So it was just living in my own irrational world.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote down all of the things that I said that I believed, and
Mm.
he divided them up into categories. And he said, I am going to have our pastor and his wife and four other couples who had been close to us and knew, at least to some extent, what I was going through. They didn't know that there were two suicide attempts. They were only aware of one. But at any rate, he said, tomorrow I'm going to have them come over. At this point, I thought that I was not saved and I was really struggling. And it was just not something that I would have done, but he went ahead and had them come over, and they shared not only truth with me to uh, let me know that, yes, you are saved. But the other thing that they did was pray with me, which was so incredible. So they came over and I shared my concerns about I'm not saved. And then they, the response that I received from them was one that amazed me. And it was unconditional love. They loved me right where I was. So they did not make fun of me. They didn't, um, oh,
Okay, if you're joining us, we had a fun little technical glitch difficulty. We lost each other. We don't know why, and at this point, it doesn't even matter. But we're right in the middle of this story of Maria's life when she had shared all of these accusations against her
mhm.
husband in a psychotic state, and that he wrote it all down. And that's the last thing I heard. So. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. And I'm assuming that at some point he shared that with you.
Yes. So what happened is he told me that he was going to have our pastor and his wife and four other couples who were aware of what we were going through, not
Mhm.
to the extent of knowing everything. They were aware of one of my suicide attempts. But anyway, he wanted them to come over to, number one, show me that I was saved, and secondly, to pray with me. And I said, fine, have him come over. I wasn't crazy about the idea, but I told him, I will show them that I'm not saved. And
Oh.
yeah, so that's where I was in my psychosis. I could not reconcile what I had done, my behavior, with the suicide attempts with a believer. I just could not wrap my head around
Oh.
that. So
So
they
another
came,
lie of not being worthy.
correct, correct.
Mm.
So they came over on August 12th, and it was, if you think about my mind being completely dark, the door to my mind being shut, and I
Right.
was involved, I was in that blackness. They came over and shared truth with me out of God's word, prayed with me. They listened to me. They listened to my concerns. And it was like I experienced unconditional love that day.
Mm.
And that was huge. It was the first time since my psychosis that that door to my mind cracked open just a little bit,
Mm.
and a pinpoint of light was able to come through, and that was hope. So
Mm.
it was beautiful from there. Um, my husband said, you know what? He was about, I want to say, 2 to 3 weeks away from having me put into a residential facility because
Mm.
I was not getting better. Um, so he said, you know what? I see a little bit of difference in your behavior. So
Mhm.
we're just going to put this on the table for a little bit And he ended up breaking up that list of irrational thoughts into different categories. And it was my responsibility to get with those 4 other ladies and either by phone or in person and share how I was doing. So accountability, it's huge.
Wow.
So over the course of the next 2 weeks, I went over to one of the ladies' houses and she was sharing a lesson with me on redemption. She was going to be sharing this at our ladies' meeting. And I said, okay, I'll come over and listen. And I remember thinking, and I expressed to her, I said, Shannon, I know that that's true. I know that, but I don't know it in my
Right.
heart. It was just something that I couldn't, again, wrap my head around what I had done and a believer. But she looked back at me and said, Maria, is there any sin that's too hard for God to forgive or too big for him to forgive? So that day when I went home, I left with 2 things. One, a little more light because I knew that that was true. So that door was continuing to open in my mind. And also an invitation I had accepted to go to that ladies' meeting. She had been inviting me all the previous year, but I never went. I had every excuse why I couldn't go because I was ashamed. I was living in guilt and shame. So the next day, which was a Wednesday, I called a friend of mine who, again, knew a little bit about my story, but didn't know the extent. She shared a book with me written by a pastor friend of theirs who wrote a book about suicide and the Christian. And that was like light bulbs going off in my mind. It was like, really, oh my goodness. I got off of that phone call and
Wow.
went to Amazon and just typed in suicide and the Christian. And all of these books came up. So I went ahead and ordered several and began reading and noticed that, in these books, it was like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yes, that's exactly what I was feeling. That's exactly what I was doing. Oh my goodness, I could just relate so much. So the Lord was showing me people, other Christians who had struggled with suicide and suicidality, suicidal thinking. After that was the meeting on that Friday, September 1st. And I went to the meeting and sat down at the table. And one of the gals that had been, was a friend of mine. She had been really good about sending me little text messages and notes, just encouraging me. Again, not knowing the extent of what I had been through, but she came over to my table and sat down. And she just began sharing some of the things that she had been going through the last few months. And oh my goodness, it was the same dark thought patterns. So not only did I see other Christians in books dealing with the same issue, but now here was a friend that I knew who was dealing with some of the same things. So I went out to my car after that meeting and I had that list, my list of irrational thoughts. And I just said, Lord, I do not want to live this way anymore. I mean, it had gotten to the place where I was washing myself in isopropyl rubbing alcohol, felt like I was contaminated, just doing bizarre things. And as soon as I said, I don't want to live this way anymore, I trust you, Lord. And that burden, that spirit of anxiety and depression was lifted immediately.
Wow.
So, yeah, so it was just the hand of God, no other explanation.
Okay, so you felt it instantaneously.
I did.
Did it in terms of your life in the next, let's say, several days, weeks,
Mhm.
did it keep sort of unfolding in the positive, good direction, right
It
direction?
did, yes. And it was like a weight, physical weight was lifted, and I had light again. And when I say that, I mean just that door to my mind being open. It was like just light flooding in, and there was
Mhm.
joy again.
There we go.
Um, so, and that was huge. And there were so many things. I mean, I could tell you story after story, but my husband, during the time that I was going through this, he would encourage himself with music. And one of the songs that he would listen to was Joy in the Morning.
Uh,
And I mean, it's exactly what we experienced.
wow.
So,
Wow, that is, I had no idea honestly what your story was.
yeah,
I really didn't. And I am, words I'm finding it hard to kind of come up with words to um, appreciate the magnitude of what you personally have been through, how it
yes,
all like accumulated to the point of not being sustainable anymore.
right,
And that's when, that really, I don't even know how you want to look at it, a shift, like a whole shift happened where it's like, I can't, that's, yeah, you couldn't do it anymore.
right.
The way it
And I
was
would
going, you couldn't do it.
and I would have to say that, just the tool or tools, schemes
Hmm.
of the enemy, um, a lot of times we try to live in perfection or have
Yeah.
those perfectionistic tendencies,
Yes.
which, like you're saying, it's not sustainable, it's not real. But you tend to live from that place of wanting other people's approval
Oh gosh, yes.
and
I understand that.
comparing yourself with others
Yes.
and controlling things. So those are the things that the Lord has really um, been working in me, through me, to give up and to release control to Him.
Right. And that it goes back
Yeah,
to your expression of living
the
in an
open-handed
open-handed surrender.
surrender.
Oh, that is,
Hmm.
I have to just take a moment to feel extraordinarily grateful for your husband. Really
Oh, oh,
grateful for his sense of commitment being lived out in very real terms on a more than a daily, probably hour by hour
yes,
basis. And the grace he showed you and the mercy he lived out in not likely being able to understand this firsthand, but seeing the woman he loved in, pain and agony and
yeah,
wanting to come alongside and refusing to give up.
yes, yeah. And I have to say, I mean, his words to, there were, after the first suicide attempt, there were a few friends from our church who came over and said, aren't you just, and he did go through a time of being angry, of course,
Yes.
and taking it personally. But the Lord gave him just, I don't know how to express it other than an overwhelming forgiveness. And he said, if I can't forgive my wife, what kind of a Christian am I?
Hmm.
And
And it wasn't like you could help it. It wasn't like,
no, and
there's so many of
he
these things that happen to us. It's not like we had a little check sheet and went, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, yeah, I'll have that.
exactly. And he demonstrated love. When you think about wedding vows and
Mm,
how you make that vow in sickness and in health,
hmm.
he he demonstrated that like nothing I've ever seen before.
Mm.
I mean, it was
Yeah,
just
he's
tremendous.
remarkable.
Yeah.
I not only am I deeply moved by your sense of wanting to heal and the huge change that you made in your life with the help of your faith,
Mhm.
but also I'm deeply moved by his complete and total support of that
Yes,
whole thing you went through. I mean,
he is.
it's astounding, really.
He is an amazing man. And that's one of the things that, and we've had the opportunity to share together as a
Oh,
couple,
wow.
which is really neat. And I can see how the Lord is opening doors for that to be more of the norm.
Right.
So, so that's been phenomenal, and
And
he's so supportive.
yes, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is that um, one of the reasons we're here is to share what we go through so that we can help one another. I mean,
Yes,
we don't live in little cubicles all by ourselves. We're in community and people go through things and we can learn from each other. And like, this woman that sat next to you and told you she understood about the darkness.
yes,
I mean, that was a gift.
yes, very much. So it's not my story, as the other components obviously are a faithful, loving husband.
Right,
And then we had fasting, praying friends and family. And
right,
that in a mighty God. And those are the components that have brought me to where I am today.
right. And I like too, I don't remember who it was, or oh, when the four couples came over,
Yes.
that they listened. I mean, I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was such a good work. They prayed, which we would expect in this scenario for prayer, and we would expect some verses to be shared. I like that they took the time to listen. And I'm
Yes.
sure that it was scary and very hard to be that vulnerable.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And just the level of shame and guilt and embarrassment, and to experience unconditional love, even
Mm,
in the face of all of that, um,
right.
has been tremendous. And it's just a gift from the
Well,
Lord.
yes, good for
So,
you. I mean,
yep,
good for you for not being successful the times you
yeah,
tried, right?
exactly. Yep,
And that those little bits of light that kept coming in, I'm sure that became something you yearned for, craved, was the more of that light, more of that light, more of that light
yes,
as you were in that healing process. That must have been very compelling.
definitely. It definitely was. And it was, I was obviously on medication at that time, and or throughout that time, had been actually since 2006, since that first episode with anxiety and depression.
Hmm.
But coming through what I did and now realizing the root cause really gave me hope that it
Hmm.
wouldn't be um, something that I would need for life.
Hmm.
So for myself, and I'm very careful to say, for me, because I understand that there are other people with, different, that need different things.
Right, absolutely.
But fortunately, in my case, I was able to work with my psychiatrist and my psychologist and come off of all medication. So that has been tremendous as well.
Hmm. And I really appreciate the way you said that because some people do need continued medication, the support of medication, depending on what their challenges
Dealing with,
are and all of that. And you don't need it anymore, and that's great too. I mean, there's no right or wrong, good or bad. It's
yes,
every person's different.
and it has been great too, because I view things from a holistic standpoint, so body, soul, spirit. And
Wonderful.
for that body part, I've chosen to do holistic.
Okay.
So that has been phenomenal for me, because I came out of psychosis with a number of health issues. as you
Oh,
can imagine.
interesting. Oh, I
Yes.
see now I would
Yes.
not have guessed that.
Yeah.
So it's that the body keeps score thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And during the 2.5 years, I ended up losing 20 pounds.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, it was not a good thing. But having blood work done by my holistic doctor, we identified several things: pre-diabetes, my cholesterol was messed up, hormones were messed up, thyroid. So a lot of
Mhm.
different issues that I've been able to take supplementation and get those things back in decent ranges.
Oh, that's great. Where can people find you? People want to follow up with you. Where can they find
Yes,
you?
yes. www.mariaimorgan.com.
Okay, so we
Yes.
an I because maybe somebody else already had Maria Morgan or
That's my middle initial.
okay, there you go. Okay, so
Yes,
mariaimorgan.com. And
correct.
is there anything else that you wanted to say as we wrap up here?
Sure. So I have been working on a book, Hope Ignited,
Okay.
released from the grip of anxiety and depression, that will be coming out in the summer of this year. So
Okay,
I've
give us the
just,
name one more time. That was so
sure.
fast.
Yes, it's Hope Ignited,
Oh, Hope
set,
Ignited. Okay,
correct, set
okay.
free from the grip of anxiety and depression.
Oh, wow. And okay, so they can learn more about that on your website.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, as
Wow.
well as my other books. And
Wow. And I mean, and I didn't know all of this, obviously, going in, and I feel it is really it's really an honor to kind of step into somebody's life for a little bit and to hear some of what they've gone through and some of what they've learned, which you've shared with us here, and some of how they did it, and with faith.
yes,
It really is an honor to be able to have this kind of a conversation, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time to share with us what you have been through and that you are truly living out being joyful, hopeful,
yes.
and an encourager. It's
Yes.
wonderful.
And I look forward to continuing to be that for others and offering the comfort that God gave me to
Yes,
comfort others who are going through something similar.
absolutely. Well,
So
thank you so much for this, Maria. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Rechelle.